to reinvent a whole new plan.
Yeah.
But we are very welcome that you have joined us. And today, Melissa, please introduce our wonderful guest.
We are so thrilled to have Eric Poe here today. Hello, Eric. How are you?
Good. How are you?
We're doing great. He's from New Jersey Pure and Cure Auto Insurance. He's the CEO and he's the strategist, but he does so many things in the community. He also opened up with some partners, the Lobby Club in Trenton. So that's a big part of economic development. And we want to hear from you a little bit about the workforce and how you hire great people to start off. So that's, as an entrepreneur, you have Tara, who we love at the Lobby Club, and we want to hear about how you do the hiring there with all of your companies and everything that you're involved in. So tell us a little bit about yourself and then about how you hire your great people.
Okay, well, I think we have about now total between about 400 employees between Michigan and New Jersey. I think the biggest tool, and this will probably sound like a sales job for the company that we use, but there's a company that specializes in trying to figure out personalities. So we actually screen every single person that ever interviews for a job. We don't even care about their resumes. So we make them take a personality survey. And based upon the results of that survey, we fit people in the appropriate positions that might help them thrive in the actual job itself. Because often interviews, people, it's the best sales job they can do for 15 minutes. That doesn't, then you hire somebody, you're like, well, this person said that they work so hard and their biggest flaw is that they're such a hard worker and they're a perfectionist and they come and work for you. And you're like, well, this person's making all these mistakes and they don't care. And it's because they just did a great job of selling you for 15 minutes.
I do remember when I was an entrepreneur, I still am, but when I had my staffing agency, that you did have every individual take that particular test. And what I do now, and I know the name of the company, but we don't want to give a plug for that, but it really does, is somebody consistent? Are they accountable? Do they think outside the box? Every position's a little different. So that's cool that you still, all these years later, use that. And I'm sure it's advanced because the workforce has advanced. So.
Well, I think that, what it teaches you is that there is no perfect person. So if you're a person that's a natural born risk taker, the last thing you should do is surround yourself with risk takers, because they're going to sit in a room and they're going to tell you, yeah, let's just take the risk. So the whole point of the personality survey is to assemble the right team, because there's always going to be blind spots for everybody. So a person that's averse to risk is going to actually really help the person who likes to take risk. And you take that in combination with their cognitive assessment, and that's how at least we feel like we've done a good job of assembling a really good team.
So the mindset of an entrepreneur, when you do that test, what are you looking for?
So it depends on what job it is. So for somebody that's a controller that's looking at making sure that our financial statements are correct, we look for somebody who's analytical and more set on protocol and making sure that they're a perfectionist. But if you're looking at somebody who's going to be a business development person, we look for somebody who's a risk taker, somebody who can build relationships really quickly. So in that personality survey, that plays a huge role in deciding who we're going to hire for that job.
And I know you cannot trick those tests very easily.
Yeah, it's funny. You can't. And the worst part is that even if you did trick somebody, then you're going to be in a job that you don't like. So, if we have a marketing director job and somebody tries to trick it and thinks that, okay, I know that they're trying to hire somebody to be outgoing and extroverted and assertive and a risk taker, but really they're conservative and they're an introvert, they're going to get into a job that they don't like and they're not going to be good at that job. Right. So really that's the reason why, even if you trick us, you're probably going to find out real quickly that it's the wrong thing to do.
So Eric, how about the growth of your organization, of your insurance company? Because I know that I see you all over the place and it's not just New Jersey. Tell us about that growth and adding the Pure and the expansion over the years. Because I know, like you said, you have 400 employees back. Maybe 5 years ago it was
actually 2 years ago.
I'm thinking last time it was about 250 employees. So that's really new for me too, to hear that it's 400. That's extreme. So how did you get there?
So really, in our world of insurance, we have a lot of bean counting people with a lot of algorithms. So it's really hard to find an opportunity. So for our growth pattern, it's really finding a reform law or something that's challenging the state. And when there's a new reform law, the environment changes so dramatically that even the big players, the Gecko's, the Progressives, the multi-billion-dollar companies that have hired thousands of employees to analyze a market, they're catching up trying to figure out what's the impact going to be of this new law. So our business strategy is really either creating a new law or helping forge a new law to create a new environment, or looking and analyzing a new law and saying, okay, I think we might know something more than what our competitors know in that space and then entering into that marketplace. So that's what happened in Michigan. There was a new law for the first time in 46 years. I was fortunate enough to be involved in actually writing the law. And so when the law got passed, we saw it as an opportunity to say, why don't we actually come in the marketplace before the billion-dollar companies come in there and see if we can beat them to the punch in terms of analyzing the impact of that law.
Well, that being said, I've actually had the pleasure of hearing you talk about, and you're a true champion for people who are underserved and are having issues with their credit score, or because of their zip code are not able to get insurance, or their insurance is higher. I would love for you to speak on that a little bit, because I did have the pleasure of hearing you speak on that, because that's impressive.
Well, it's a scary thing, but before the Civil Rights Act was passed, life insurance companies used to actually know, and we all know this statistically, that blacks in America would live shorter lives than whites. So life insurance companies in the industry in America prior to 1964 and the Civil Rights Act would simply ask in the application for insurance, for life insurance, what was your race? And if you said that you were black, you would get the most expensive rate, and you would actually get half the benefits. But once the Civil Rights Act was passed, they said you can't use race as a factor anymore. The life insurance industry, some of these insurance companies simply deleted the question of race, and as a proxy substitute simply said, what's your highest level of educational attainment and what type of job do you have? And so what they previously had for blacks, they put in there as shoe shine boy, bus boy, waiters, and they said highest level of education, high school. And they didn't change anything else. And that proxy component was something they found that they were still doing all the way up to the year 2000. So after the internet was actually born, there were still life insurance companies did this. And then what happened was in 2004 in the state of New Jersey, the Department of Insurance allowed insurance companies to start using credit scores for the first time. And then we found out that there were some multi-billion-dollar companies using educational attainment and occupation as well, giving the best rates for the people that have four-year college degrees or graduate degrees and high-paying jobs. And the reason for that is because profitability in my industry of car insurance is tied to income. So any proxy that can derive a correlation to income, my industry will try to adopt it because it generates better profits. Unfortunately, I wasn't raised that way to A, give up a fight, and then B, to adopt practices that we know surreptitiously cause people that are, less fortunate to be behind the eight ball already. So I fought for about 16 years, still trying to get this bill passed in the state of New Jersey. The bill's been introduced every year for 16 years. And despite the fact that other states have passed this ban, we still haven't got it passed in the state of New Jersey.
Well, thank you for doing that. And that can roll right into, the Trenton Economic and Development, your work there with the arena and everything else. Tell us about your work in the city.
Well, Trenton has always been puzzling to me because I've argued a few cases before the Supreme Court as an attorney, and I always go to Trenton and I always say, geez, it's amazing. We, have to come to Trenton all the time. There's tens of thousands of workers in Trenton. It's our state capital. And every single year that we would have to hire lawyers to go to the courts in Trenton, because there's a federal court in Trenton, there's a municipal court in Trenton, there's a superior court in Trenton. I would always say, this is amazing that there's not a restaurant in Trenton, that there's nobody stays in Trenton past 5 p.m. that works there. And it's really a shame that there's not more of an investment in our state, in the infrastructure of Trenton. So we took that as an opportunity to start finding opportunities where we could help support Trenton. And one of them being the naming rights of the Cure Insurance Arena, which is a beautiful arena. I don't know how many people have been there.
All of us.
I mean, it's sad. We used to have, I think, a minor league basketball team, or there used to be a minor league hockey team.
Yeah, the Devils actually. They're minor.
Yes.
They're junior league there. Yeah.
It's really weird because if you talk to the people involved in that arena, they say that they compete with, the biggest problem with Trenton is not that the facility doesn't hold 15,000 people, not that it's beautiful, it doesn't have suites, all the things you would expect, right? It's just that the industry of concerts and the industry of these multi-million-dollar sports teams are that they're concerned that the people who go to games in North Jersey compete with the people in Philadelphia, and that if you put a attractive venue to go, see an event in Trenton, you're going to cannibalize Philadelphia or cannibalize North Jersey. And I say they're insane. I totally disagree. I think there's enough people in Mercer County and Bucks County that are dying to go there.
It is actually the best hub when you think about Trenton being actually in the middle of New York and Philadelphia.
Right,
It is the perfect hub for that. But going further down into that Trenton development, because I think there is a lot of stigma into it. As you know, by example, when you go to the arena, it's great, it's beautiful, but then the people, would they go and discover things around it, and what is going to be happening?
Yeah, I think one of the funniest things that someone taught me once is like perception is reality, right? And so when I was hoping to help Trenton a lot more, I was saying you got to start at image. The reality is, there are sections of Trenton that why are we grouping it all together? Like, let's come up with a subsection of Trenton and call it something, like call it the Cap City District or the Restaurant District or something, so that when we refer to it, we're not just going, oh, Trenton, and maybe somebody's getting mugged or somebody's dying or there's a body that comes out in a river, right? You know what I mean? Like, let's start with that. Let's start with street lights. Let's start with optics. And instead of trying to ambitiously go in the whole city of Trenton, find an area that we can carve out. And that arena is a perfect example. It's right by Route 29. It's not by an area that you should be worried about, right? And they should have support of the government. The state should be pouring billions of dollars, not millions of dollars. I know they've spent a lot of money on redoing some of the buildings that the state workers work in, but infrastructurally, I think there needs to be somebody that says it's about time that we're not embarrassed about our state capital.
Oh, I agree.
Yes.
Talk about the lobby club, because I remember when you were thinking about opening it up with your partners, we were in your basement, you were having a party, and everybody's like, you're crazy. The economic development in Trenton, it's never going to work. And I was one of the first people that knew about that down in your basement years ago. Talk about when you got started, how it's doing now, because people really, our producer was there yesterday, it's wonderful. And again, it's members, but there's a lot of people in Trent that need that lunch spot to go. Talk about how you're doing now.
So we're doing really well. We have about 120 members. We have about 2 members join a day, and really we got killed with COVID, but the reason behind it is really kind of a short, long story, but I'll just say that the advertising firm that we used at Cure Auto Insurance about 15 years ago, the guy produced and came up with the Kool-Aid mascot. He came, the big picture.
Right.
And he also came up with a few award-winning commercials. And he said, look, the reason why I'm successful as an independent entrepreneur in advertising is that I work with a business to try to understand their business before just advertising. And he told me this story that one of his clients was Richard Branson in the late 80s, early 90s. And he said, Branson tried to start to launch an airline. And a time where no one was trying to launch airlines. TWA was folding, billion-dollar companies were just not be able to survive. And he said that this was right after Lockerbie, and there was terrorists that were bombing, planes, and no one was flying. But his first route for Virgin Atlantic was between London and New York. Yeah. And he called up the head of the advertising agency, who was a colleague of mine, and he said, listen, Richard Branson got on the phone and said, listen, we got to fold. They're 100% right. Nobody's flying on our planes. And the owner of the agency, Alan Kay, said, well, Rich, when you say nobody's flying, can you just describe to me who's actually flying? And he said, well, we've got about 20 people and 15 of them sit in business class. So he came back after about a day and he said, listen, Rich, I have a question for you. There's like 2 things I need for you to concede. The first one is, can you tell me whether or not you can rip out 2/3 of your seats of your airplanes? And then I want to know, also on top of that, will you accept frequent flyer miles from British Airways immediately? And I said, well, why did you say that? He said, well, because this is what I've learned, that people travel for work, not necessarily because they want to. It doesn't matter how scared they are. They have a job. They got to put food on their table for their kids. He goes, the people that you're describing have to fly from New York to London, whether they want to or not. So the problem is your biggest competitor is British Airways. And the only way we're going to get these people over is if they lose their frequent flyer miles and you accept them immediately. So the advertisement was about how they accepted everybody immediately from all their miles from British Airways. And what it dawned on me was that at some point in my life, if I ever find an opportunity where people don't necessarily want to do something, but they're coerced to do it because they have to do it to maintain their job. And I thought to myself, Trenton, it's a perfect example. 40,000 people, 25,000 people go there every single day. But if you ask people where do you like to work, they might say, I want to be in Princeton, right? But they might be wanting to be in New Brunswick, but they got to go to Trenton.
Right, exactly.
So I looked at that as an opportunity to say, like, if we can carve out a restaurant, if we can carve out an area where people can do business, and these lawyers that you're paying $500 an hour to go to the courthouse,
they would love a place.
but they can't even a cheeseburger or a steak or a martini.
And all the business.
And it's so spotty as well. You have a good place and then not so many shops afterward because they close, or they had those signs on. So yes, carving a space. But the story of Virgin is an amazing story because I remember that story when this started. And actually, I was in Switzerland and I love that airline because they really reinvented the whole industry of service into the airline industry. And that for me is also the focus of what an entrepreneur is today. And you know, give us what is the challenge of an entrepreneur today?
Oh, well, the biggest challenge is making sure that you're not too risky.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
risk.
I think entrepreneurs all have one thing in common is that they don't necessarily see risk as risk. They see an objective and they say,
Right.
how am I going to reach that objective? They don't think of failure. And then sometimes you're sitting up at night going, did I really think about everything that we did? But for me, I think the biggest challenge is making sure that I surround myself with people that are the opposite of me. So, you know, like in my chief litigation officer is a woman that, you know, was a clerk of the Supreme Court and went to Michigan law. But if you looked at her personality index, she's always going to be telling me the risk of everything. And she's always going to be like, well, Eric, you know, you think this or that. And I'm very aggressive. So when it comes to litigation, I'm thinking, well, I'm going to win this case. And she'll sit in a room with me and be like, well, this is what they could also allege. And they could do this and they could do that. So to make a reasoned decision, the key is making sure that you don't have yes people in the room. You know, I think that's the biggest risk I have.
Nice.
So is that how you start
Very nice.
to build your executive team? You always find those who can challenge the opposite of what you are.
Yeah, and I would say the honesty and building that trust. So one of the things that we embark in my organization is that we have a mindful leadership PhD who comes in, and every 2 weeks when we have a leadership meeting, we meditate for 10 minutes in silence, you know, and we try to learn about how to better effectively communicate and be vulnerable because you know, if you look at most of the conflicts in any company, it's usually about effective communication. We're all wired differently, right? So what might be a reason as to why I'm getting upset about a project not being done on time might not be the same reason as to why you're not getting that project done on time. Right. And for us not to understand each other and be able to effectively communicate in a way that we're all on the same level playing field saying, we're going to try our best effort to be vulnerable with how we speak and realize that words are only put in meaning from the receiver, not from the giver. Because very often people will say, well, that person said this to me, or that person condescended to me, and they put the responsibility on the other person as to why they're reacting. But what we try to teach in our leadership team is like, the meaning actually comes from the receiver. And the best way that our mindfulness leadership coach says it all the time is, well, let's explain to you how communication works. If the person that offended you was speaking in fluent Russian, how would you have reacted in that scenario? And the person who doesn't know anything about Russian would say, I would probably not even get affected because I wouldn't even know what they're saying.
Right.
And then you say, okay, well then by definition, you are defining the fact that you are putting the meaning into those words because you can choose to have no meaning to those words.
That's true.
So I think making sure that your leadership team does not get caught up in the semantics of words and thoughts, and trying to make sure that we all understand on a level playing field, you know, emotional accountability is what our goal is. Because I think you spend more time getting upset at work about the person that you don't like, or the new boss that you have, or, you know, like somebody that's underneath you, or somebody that's with you that's not pulling their weight, and you're getting frustrated. And are you going to be passive aggressive about it? Are you going to start saying it, right? I mean, that's what I think we spend a lot of our time doing.
Yes, that is absolutely the truth. But what is the magical moment where you really don't like that person, and no matter
Gabber, you
say they don't fit the profile.
There's Gabby being passive aggressive. I get the clue. I get the hint. I'm seeing it.
They have a tougher personality, then you make the decision based on that.
Well, you know what we've learned is that, you know, they're either mindful people or they're not. And when you see people that raise their energy and get very upset and they act out, they're usually resisting something. But the easiest way to display that is to be the most mindful person there is and being vulnerable. And that person will find themselves screaming in a room by themselves. And sooner or later, that person will identify that the insane person is the person who's screaming at somebody who doesn't even say anything back. So the goal is to hold people accountable, but in a vulnerable way to where you don't actually raise your energy. So that person becomes the screaming person in the room that identifies and confesses to the rest of the world, I'm the person who can't handle this, not you. So eventually, if they don't produce, you have empirical evidence to show to that person and say, look, I've come to you, we brought these things up, and you document it, and hopefully
Lots
at
of
that point in time,
documentation these days. So I know that you do a lot for the community, obviously, and we have an event, Dress for Success, A Day in Her Shoes, which is coming up March 29th. So we're excited to partner with the Lobby Club again. Talk to us about other events that you do with the Lobby Club.
So about, I'd say, half of our events are fundraisers for legislators. And, I think that's what happened when De Lorenzo's, the steakhouse, got demolished. There used to be a place where the legislators, lobbyists, and lawyers would all meet for a 2-hour lunch back in the day when people had martinis in the middle of the day and we had 50% of the business people being alcoholics. But I'm not necessarily sure.
But the good news is you walked right out. The train was right there. So you just got on the train. Nobody was driving. Let's keep that straight.
Why does it sound familiar to you?
Because it was my hometown. That's how I put myself through college.
He was in the
was
restaurant business,
bartending
too.
in the restaurant business in Chambersburg. So I'm Italian. So I'm going to push back a little bit with you, Eric. When we yell and scream, that just means we're passionate.
Right.
That's the Italian version of it, because everyone, and unless you yell and scream at our dinner table, you're not going to be heard. But then everybody hugs and kisses and tells each other they love each other. But that's just culturally. That's not
true.
appropriate in the business. But back to Lorenzo's, yes. We did have an amazing steakhouse, but we also had 40 restaurants back in the day.
Yes.
And we want those restaurants to come back. Hopefully you're the start of things getting back into Trenton and people having places to go when they walk out their doors. The lobbyists, the business people, but also the locals. So we hope to see that happening soon. So congratulations on the
Thank
restaurant.
you.
Glad I was there opening night.
Yes, you were.
I didn't get in the commercial though.
No, you didn't.
They shot a commercial. Somehow I didn't make
How
the
did you not
commercial.
make the
How?
commercial?
I tried to get in everywhere I could.
We'll get you in another one.
So, Eric, before you leave us today, do you have a message right here for our viewers?
Ooh, the message is, I think the biggest problem that we have in today's society is just being accountable for your own feelings. Like, we're always trying to hold everybody else responsible for the feelings that everyone else has, right? That you have yourself. And instead of always pushing everybody else to say that you're responsible the way I feel, let's do some accountability in ourselves. That's number one. And I always feel like the two things that I try to tell everybody, at least in our own work environment, is to be passionate about something, stand for something, don't give it up, and to be vulnerable in the way that you communicate to people. Because otherwise, when you take that passion, like sometimes I would testify and I get very passionate, and people misinterpret that as arrogance. And I think that my biggest challenge for myself is to always come off more vulnerable so that people will hear you.
Yeah. Good message.
Thank you so much, Eric, for joining us.
Eric, thank you for
today.
being
It was
here,
Thank you for
friends.
having
We
me.
really
Honor.
appreciate it. Great tips.
Thank you.
And happy holiday.
Thank you.
Happy
You too.
holidays, Eric Poe.
Thank you.
See you soon.